This is Michael Popok, Legal AF, with breaking news on the January 6th and its release of transcripts of witness testimony that now establishes that Donald Trump was indeed considering giving blanket pardons to every person who attacked the Capitol on January 6th, along with a long list of elected officials who came begging and pleading on bended knee for Donald Trump to save them from their own bad acts and give them a presidential pardon. How do we know this? Because the new transcripts that were just released yesterday, another batch of 12 or 14 or so, included Johnny McEntee, the director of personnel for Donald Trump, a little-known figure in history, but who now has a tremendous amount of testimony that the Department of Justice will be using against Donald Trump for considering these blanket pardons against the Jan 6 committee. Cassidy Hutchinson, in the last of her transcripts released yesterday, also confirmed that Mark Meadows wanted a pardon. Mark Meadows wanted a pardon for himself. Mark Meadows wanted a pardon for everyone who worked at the Capitol and at the White House that day, regardless of what they were involved with. Think about this. The chief of staff for the White House, for himself and others, wanted a pardon against criminal prosecution for his role related to and leading up to and beyond Jan 6th. That is heart-stopping new information that's been revealed by Cassidy Hutchinson and Johnny McEntee, as is the long list of elected officials who they have confirmed in their witness statements, also sought at the last minute in this going out of business sale by Donald Trump to be pardoned. That included Matt Gaetz, not being pardoned for Jan 6, being pardoned because of his role in the sex trafficking prosecution investigation at the time. We talked about Mark Meadows. Mo Brooks sought a pardon. Andy Biggs, Arizona, sought a pardon. Scott Perry, who I've talked about in prior hot takes, who's at the center of the Department of Justice's current investigation, this Republican from Pennsylvania, in his role in the fake elector scandal, in his role in trying to have Donald Trump corrupt and co-opt the Department of Justice and install Jeffrey Clark as his acting attorney general in the final days of his administration in order to continue to promote his false, scandalous lies about the election, to prevent the turnover of the White House from him to Joe Biden. That Scott Perry sought a pardon. Talk about guilty mind. Louis Gohmert, Texas, sought a pardon. Jim Jordan, who some people think could be the Speaker of the House if McCarthy runs into problems in the voting. He of Ohio sought a pardon. Marjorie Taylor Greene also sought a pardon, according to the testimony of Cassidy Hutchinson and others. That is quite a list. To paraphrase Donald Trump, why do you need a Fifth Amendment and why do you need a pardon if you haven't done anything wrong? That is the current testimony, and should come as no surprise because Donald Trump has been abusing his pardon power since he was first elected. He pardoned in order to cover up. He pardoned in order to reward political operatives. He pardoned in a way that undermined law enforcement. He pardoned Flynn. He pardoned Bannon. He didn't get around to pardoning Manafort, but he would have. So this is a president that saw the pardon power as the ultimate grift to be able to dole out to his supporters and to cover up active investigations and to undermine the rule of law. And if it wasn't for, once again, somebody that seems to have stood up to the president, is his former White House counsel, Pat Cippolone. Pat Cippolone, who is probably one of the lead witnesses against Donald Trump in several grand juries that are being run by Jack Smith and his team of prosecutors in Washington. Pat Cippolone, who not only testified to the Jan 6 committee, but testified to the grand jury about the fake elector scandal, about Mar-a-Lago, about Jan 6th, about Donald Trump's criminal state of mind. And he did it without putting up any attorney-client, attorney-work product, or litigation privilege to stop his testimony. That issue was resolved in a secret courtroom run by the chief judge, Beryl Howell, of the District of Columbia, who already heard all of the issues and decided that the privilege did not apply, probably because of the crime fraud exception, and that Pat Cippolone would have to testify without any barriers, completely unedited, to the grand jury. So that Pat Cippolone stood up to President Trump, according to the testimony of Cassidy Hutchinson and Johnny McEntee, and said, no, Mr. President, you can't and should not pardon all of the Jan 6th insurrectionists or any of the Jan 6th insurrectionists. That is a terrible, terrible idea. And according to McEntee, Trump pushed back even on that. Well, what about the ones that were just, walking around and didn't do anything? Now, let's throw the deep contrast, split screen, between what Donald Trump said in public and what he said in private. In public, choking on his words written for him by his children and other people, on January 7th, he stood at a podium in front of the nation, allegedly the consoler-in-chief, and told them that it was a heinous act perpetrated by these terrorists on the nation's capital. That's what he said in public. Of course, we've seen the clips, and the Jan 6 committee showed the clips of him, quote-unquote, rehearsing with a teleprompter that speech and rewriting it on the fly because he couldn't condemn them the way that even Ivanka and Jared Kushner wanted him to condemn them. He had to rewrite it to water it down because, these were his people. These were people that supported him, and his narcissism and megalomaniacal approach wouldn't let him properly condemn the attackers. But he at least called them heinous attackers of the nation's capital. But in private, behind closed doors, not thinking he would ever see the light of day, he's debating with Pat Cippolone, his White House counsel, about giving a fair number of them a pass, a pardon. And on the campaign trail, losing candidate Trump, tells a Texas rally, first thing he's going to do when he gets in office is pardon everybody. Now we're back to pardoning everyone. So it's, again, an abuse of the pardon power in order to curry favor with his base, in order to protect him from investigations. And that's where the Jack Smith component comes into play. The question is going to be, can the president, in exercising his unfettered right to pardon, under the Constitution and Supreme Court precedent, if he uses it to stop an investigation, which he's done, if he uses it to interfere with a criminal investigation, which he has done, can that stand alone, the use of the pardon power, as a count of obstruction of justice? That is likely the biggest count that Donald Trump faces, this type of obstruction of justice. It's the one that most presidents fear. Even Nixon said that he had never obstructed justice. That alone rings hollow for Donald Trump, but that is probably the obstruction claim, the obstruction count that the Department of Justice is most focused on. If you read between the lines, for example, of Merrick Garland, when he announced the appointment of Jack Smith, he said 4 different occasions on that press conference, that they were focused on obstruction. Not the Espionage Act, not some of these other things, but obstruction. And it could be obstruction of an official proceeding, but it's more likely obstruction of justice, which encompasses things like witness tampering, trying to use the pardon power to stop a legitimate investigation, firing people like an FBI director, a special prosecutor, an attorney general, who are all hot on your trail in order to try to convict you or prosecute you. All of those things can kind of fall into the bucket of obstruction of justice, which is why the pardon power, which the founding fathers gave to the president, is so dangerous in the hands of a crackpot, of a despot, of a tyrannical, maniacal narcissist, because he will use it not to let off the hook and pardon people who deserve it, who served their time or wrongly convicted or changed the law or social mores, means that their crime was not as bad as when it was first convicted or sentenced or some other thing that rehabilitated them in the eyes of the law and justice. Not that use of the pardon power. The use of the pardon power by a criminal element to cover his tracks and to stop prosecutions and investigations of him, those are his cronies around him, and those that he loves. That could be the obstruction of justice count that is the catch-all that Jack Smith in his prosecutions is relying upon. So we're going to have to look going further about the use of the pardon power, the blanket pardons, all of the other people, elected officials that asked for it, as the Department of Justice, through the lens of the prosecution, looks at whether there's an obstruction of justice count. So this is Michael Popok, Legal AF, reporting about the new reveal from yesterday with the newest crop of transcripts coming out of the Jan 6 committee, that blanket pardons were considered by Donald Trump of all Jan 6 insurrectionists, and a long list of almost a dozen elected officials, and starting with Mark Meadows, the chief of staff, sought pardons from Donald Trump in the waning days of his administration.
MeidasTouch is unapologetically pro-democracy. And look, we know you are too. So please make sure you check out our best-selling shirt and our best-selling gear, the unapologetically pro-democracy gear. And hey, while you're at it, make sure you check out my favorite shirt and one of our most famous designs, It Wasn't Rigged, You're Just a Loser, at store.meidastouch.com. That's store.meidastouch.com.